Hi, everyone. I'm here today to welcome Chang, who's head of fixed income at Ping An of China Asset Management. What you may not know if you're not familiar with Ping An is that this is the largest insurance company in the world and an extraordinarily important asset manager globally and in China. We're thrilled to have you with us today, Sean.
Thank you very much.
Tell us a little bit about, what you want to talk about today and what you see as the market developments that everyone needs to know about.
Right. I think the message that we have today is very important because, as we all know, green initiatives now becoming an important part of our not just investment, but also our daily life. And we have to focus from all aspects. And I do think that green and environmental protections would becomes the norm basics for not only here in this part of the region, but globally. So I would recommend everyone's to be raising their awareness about the environment, and also what we've been going to be discussed today would be very thoughtful and would able to have those insights everyone could share with each other.
And in terms of being part of this conference, and we have to thank you for having joined us as a sponsor for the Climate Bonds Conference 2021. We're thrilled to have you part of this. But tell us about why and what you're engaging globally in this fashion.
For one thing, we need to highlight Ping An as one of the leader in the insurance and finance field. Ping An also one of the pioneer in the responsible investment of the UN. And we also noticed that in 2016, there are the climate initiatives as well as the Paris, how to protect the environment. And Ping An is really committed to it. And we share those processes within our group. And for China Asset Management here in Hong Kong, we have these initiatives applied to our investment process as well as our fund management. So here today, I'm going to share some of our philosophy, how that applies to our fixed income fund strategies here in Hong Kong, and what are those implications, and how could we impact to these green initiatives here in Asia, China, as well as globally.
Tell me a bit more about that then. Let's get down to this. You talk about philosophy and approach. Tell us more.
I do believe that investors initially would have the concern, how much of these strategies can able to help them generate income, returns. But these days, I think another factors we have to be considered, how much impact, and we're talking about those carbon reductions apply to these investment process, and how much green we're going to share, within our investment. I think people would need to recognize return is important, risk are important, but we also have to adjust how much green we can able to save and how much environment we can able to protect. So we have these strategies been in place since 2019. And for the last more than a year, we have been successfully have well received those responses. And we also being that fortunate this year, we have won the award with some of the well-known media. And that widely recognized in the industry that our approaches, investment process, philosophy can be widely recognized here in China, in Asia. I'm sure there are investors having those concerns whether China Green can apply those taxonomy similar to those in the UN and other major markets. I have to say, for the last over 1 year of development, China policymakers have put in lots of effort and trying to align with those standards in the EU and other major markets, and we are close to that. despite the fact that I think still the market is not as by and large, the population not as big as the EU, for example, but the China in the green financing areas has grown tremendously over the past 3 years, and policies and regulations has been very supportive. Organizations within China, policymakers, they having great support to all these initiatives. And I'm sure with the Accord of Paris, China's would also able to meeting those target objectives in the next 20 years. So that is a really encouraging sign, and being one of the leaders in that particular field by China.
Indeed, with the President Xi Jinping's 30-60 announcement of carbon neutrality by 2060, we have a very ambitious target for the Chinese economy, and that's being reflected in different regulatory measures. Just for the audiences know, we've been working with Ping An of China Asset Management for some time, providing data around bonds that in the Chinese market would also meet the national criteria as a data set. I'm sure Sean can talk about that another time if people are interested in more detail. But the key thing is that the Chinese government has been moving towards greater integration with global markets, as well as promoting more CO2 relevant measures in the Chinese market, including, of course, the introduction of emissions trading scheme. And later this week, on Thursday, we will hear about the common ground taxonomy that we've been supporting the European Commission and the Chinese government, People's Bank of China, on developing, which will be released later in September in a draft form. So there are many measures happening. It's pretty exciting, isn't it, Sean? I mean, this market, of course, the green bond market, just that market, is going to grow something like 80% this year in China, which must make your job easier with a larger universe to look at in terms of potential investments. Is that right? And what are investors that you're speaking to saying? How interested are they in this topic? What's the demand like?
Well, this is a really exciting moment. I think in China and the green market now being able to broaden itself from transportations to energies to water, you name it. So this market actually even surpassed the old traditional China bond, being now very diversified, and investors could able to broaden up their investment scope. I think to those investors, if they have yet to explore this China bond market, the green market would be even more interesting, because I think in EU and other major markets, if they have already been fully invested, now this is a new market, and not just exciting in the sense, how these market impacts could able to help China and globe about the green environment, but also in terms of investment opportunities. This is a very significant way to help global investors to diversify their portfolio. So I think with this more than 15 trillion market now, with this component is growing faster and much bigger, investors could able to do their due diligence properly and could able to apply to their portfolio and how they could reduce the risk, as well as try to avoid those greenwashing in their homeland.
I think that's an important point, that managing the risk, the greenwashing risk, but also the returns risk. I mean, what we're seeing in the global markets is that green bonds perform better in secondary markets than compared to our vanilla bonds, because of their extra features that investors are particularly keen on. So it's a value retention vehicle for investors here. Do you find that the nature of understanding and demand from investors is similar across the region? I mean, you have clients everywhere, of course, or do you see some differences? What sort of differences do you see, if any, in terms of investor understanding?
Interesting that for last couple of years, Asian investors has been a bit slower because as we all know, the taxonomy in EU, they have already been applying it for more than decades. Mm-hmm. Here in Asia, it was a bit slow, but the pace picking up last 12 months have grown really fast, like how you described it. And investors, for example, here in Hong Kong, those organizations and supervisory bodies, they have really well defined. If I can name an example, Hong Kong Stock Exchange has been applying the standard in disclosing informations about those ESG and green data with all these listed companies since 2018. Investors could able to do that, audit their due diligence within those Hong Kong listing companies, and could able to find out, if those transitional processes or those major impact could able to change that kind of behavior in applying green standard. So we are here in this part of the region, exciting, seeing lots of changes. Policies are very supportive, and there are new names from the regions could able to support this market continue to grow. So sustainability also applies here, and it is across the whole spectrum. People can make use to that in their investment universe.
And in terms of what's your advice to people about identifying and capturing the opportunities, what do you tell people when people ask that question?
For example, if we referring to some of our strategies in 2020, this new market actually we picked up from these new IPOs, these new names issuers. Some of those we never heard before. Some of those, they could be a 3-year startup. There are a huge premiums investors could able to pick up, not just they meeting those requirements, but also being able to capture these additional premiums to have alpha source generation. So this part would be very exciting. And on average, if we're referring to investment grade bonds, the spread would be in the range of about 120 to probably 200 basis points of spread over the comparable treasuries. But sometimes you can able to identify another 30 to 50 basis points premiums, intrinsic value in these green bonds here in China and Asian region. So we
apply these
so cool, kind
of
strategies. Yes,
so cool.
Have this standard as well as the additional alpha sources we can generate it, and that's proven our track record within 2020 being a successful one, and that demonstrate the opportunities is here, and we are exciting to share with you today and with the audience.
I mean, that is an amazing story, isn't it? It's a fantastic story. So let's talk about growth and development. We've talked about the broader issue of the 3060 target and how that's impacting policy development around China. And, we are in contact with study groups all over the place that are figuring about how to implement these strategies, and let alone developments like the ETS. And I just heard from one of my other colleagues in China talking about the extent we're now seeing CO2 factors beginning to appear in import and export taxes in China. The government's doing a lot. What does it mean for what opportunities we're going to see? I mean, do you think there's going to be a lot more bonds from renewable energy sector? Do you see more water bonds? What kinds of sectors do you think we're likely to see more of?
So at the moment, still the energy and the power sectors has dominate a large part of the green area, followed by, for example, building and infrastructures. Last but not least, the transportations, about the environmental, recyclable related transportation systems also being a fast growing one. Going forward, we probably would see there are more resources invested into, for example, waste recycle in, for example, the land related infrastructure projects, how to deal with the waste and how to deal with these disposable would be one of the main focus. And there's going to be lots of fiscal spending by countries, and cities applying into these recycle systems, that will make these particular sectors to grow compared to, for example, energy and other sources of, for example, water utilities and other areas. So I think the governments would put a lot of attention to investors because they lag behind for last couple of years. But I'm sure as this ball keep on rolling, the governments would put more initiatives and will catch up with the private sectors. And they could even, being the PPP, the public and private participations as a jointly putting effort into these sectors across the board into all these industry could able to catch up later on. So the market previously has focused on lots of attention on the hardware, how they could build a system to meet those carbon reductions objectives. But I think transitional green would also be one of the important areas because those traditional power gencos somehow they couldn't all of a sudden retire their equipments. But I think the governments have to take those policies and initiatives, sharing with these utility companies how to transform their power generations to a more green initiatives focus. And that could also well be, another major aspects coming for 2022 onwards. Because again, I think the policymakers have lack of these kind of supports before. And for example, here in Hong Kong, those major power generation companies, the three major ones, if we review their auditing performances, they still a bit lag behind as compared to other major cities like in Singapore or in other major parts of the world, in Europe or in the US. So I do believe the Hong Kong governments would put in more policy support and in order to transform some of these processes to a more green and carbon reduction focus. Last but not least, from hardware to those transitional processes, and it comes to reporting and auditing. At the moment, for example, we use here Hong Kong as an example. Stock exchange would take those initiatives applying to those listing companies. But what about other public companies? What about other private companies if they are not listed? Are they meeting those requirements, right? Would there be any covenant indentures of, for example, bond issuers would follow suit and applying these kind of standards when they do fundraising, when they do financing? So in terms of the legal aspects, in terms of the disclosures, and in terms of those policy making, we will see that as the third leg of growth and initiatives to support the whole ecosystem that can able to sustain. So these three major areas we foresee in 2022 onwards would be those limelight and able to pay a lot of attention to those and could able to find more interesting ideas, not just for investment, but to analyzing these green taxonomy here in China and the Asian region.
So we have a lot of regulatory work, a lot of market work going on, which is only going to turbocharge this market.
Exactly. Yes, agree. Totally agree, Sean.
Look, it's an exciting space to be in, Sean. We're very privileged, thrilled to have you with us today, I have to say.
Thank you, Sean.
And thank you to Ping An China Asset Management for the kind of work that you're doing in making these opportunities more available to investors. This is a big part of the change in our ecosystem we need to see. Sean, any final words before we wrap up?
Well, the final words is, China, is going to be one of the green leaders, and we, as part of the SAR government, Hong Kong will also take lots of those initiatives. And if we could focus more a bit on those three major aspects areas, I do believe investors as well as the green community would find a lot of interesting ideas for 2022. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and look forward to keeping up this conversation. There's so much happening and still so much to do to make it work. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you very much. Thanks, Sean.